Okay, here in our next unit we're going to be dealing with polynomials, more specifically polynomial functions. So we need to start off with a quick review of some things that you should really know about polynomials, and that's identifying the different parts and the different types of polynomials that we can deal with, how to write them in standard form, how to identify the degree, and things of that nature. So this will be a short little video just reviewing the material that you've learned in previous units. So if we take a quick look, these notes actually should look familiar. I've used them before in a previous lesson. And the reason is because we need a good solid review on various terms like leading coefficient, the constant, what the degree is. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to have a good idea of when a polynomial is written in standard form. So you can see each of these terms discussed here. So remember, leading coefficient, and if we look at the leading coefficient, it is the number that is in front of the highest degree variable. The constant term is the value at the end of the expression that does not have a variable associated with it, so it's just a number. And then the degree is going to be the highest value exponent in the polynomial function. And of course, if we're writing these in standard form, the degree value, the highest degree value or the highest exponent value should be started on the far left, and we should be writing those in descending order of our exponents from left to right. Now, if we write polynomial function in standard form correctly, we create some common types of polynomials. Now, you should be very familiar with the first three at this point because we've dealt with constant, linear, and quadratic pretty extensively in Algebra 2. And we've had, through our exponent properties, we've dealt with polynomials or exponents to the third and fourth degree. So we need to recognize these. We need to know the different types. We need to know how to recognize not only the common type name, but what degree is associated with it, and what it would look like when it's written in standard form. So really, this video is just all about being able to identify the various parts of polynomial functions. So you can see here in example number 1, this is just a basic identification problem. Okay, and it says decide whether the function of is a polynomial function or not. And in order for it to be a polynomial function, we have to make sure that all of the exponents are whole numbers. They cannot be integers, they cannot be variables, they cannot be fractions. So that's the very first thing that we need to be aware of. So exponents should be whole. And as we look across this function, we can see we have x squared, x to the fourth, and then we have a constant term where we have no x value. So we know that this is a polynomial function. Now, if it is, the first thing they ask us to do is to write it in standard form, which means that we're going to have to rearrange it in terms of our exponent with our highest degree exponent to the left and descending to the right. Then the last three things it asks us to do after we write it in standard form is to state the degree, the type, and what the leading coefficient is. And so we're dealing with a fourth degree polynomial that we get from the highest exponent. A fourth degree polynomial is a quartic function, and our leading coefficient is the coefficient in front of our degree. So that is the basis of what we're going to start off with, is just some basic identification problems. So if we move on to the next page, we can see we have a sample, problem 1. And as you go down, there's an A, B, and C part to this. So what I'd like you to do at this point right now is pause the video and go ahead and make sure you answer all of the following parts and the directions for all three of these problems. Okay. If we look at this first one, it says the first thing it's asking us to do, decide whether the function is a polynomial function. And the first thing that stands out here is this. We have an exponent that is in variable form. This immediately tells us that we're dealing with an exponential function and not a polynomial function. So since this exponent is in variable form, we can say that this is not a polynomial. Excuse me. It's not a polynomial function. And since it's not a polynomial function, there's no need to try to write it in standard form. There is no degree, type, or leading coefficient. And so we can say the reason it's not is because one of our exponents is a variable. Okay, moving on to the next one. If we look at this, we said that all of our exponents needed to be whole numbers. And we can see here that this particular exponent is not a whole number. -1 is an integer. Now, if you recall, whenever you rewrite this, it would look something like this. And whenever you have a fraction like that in a function, that's called a rational function, and it's no longer a polynomial function. So this is not a polynomial function, and the reason why is because the variable has a negative exponent, so it's not a whole number. So that's extremely important for you to recognize. Alright, and then we take a look at the third one. Now, interestingly enough, with the third one, we have all kinds of symbols and a square root sign and various things like that. So this one out of all of them would look like it should not be a polynomial function, but it actually is. If we look at all of the parts, the variables are all whole numbers. We have constant terms. So we can rewrite this in standard form with the highest degree exponent, which is squared. So we can say pi x squared minus 0.5x to the first, which we don't write, minus the square root of 2. And the square root of 2 would just be some constant number written as a decimal, like 1.414. So this does make it a polynomial function, and now we need to write the remainder of it. So the very first thing that they wanted us to say is what is our degree, and our degree of the function is the highest exponent value. So we're dealing with a second degree function. The type would be a quadratic, and so if you remember when we did quadratic functions, they were all second degree functions. And then the most bizarre thing here is that our leading coefficient is actually the value pi, which is 3.14, on and on and on. But it does represent the leading coefficient in this particular polynomial function. So there you've gotten a look at three kind of bizarre looking polynomial expressions or functions, and trying to decide whether they are or they are not polynomial functions. So good practice to start before we get into more detailed stuff.